asked my community on YouTube to send me their operator concepts, and in this video I'll be reviewing them and rating them based on how fun they would be to play, their balance, and how unique and thought out they are. And then at the end of the video I'll be reviewing an operator concept of my own that I made 4 years ago. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first operator concept has been sent in by Lime7494. Huge shout out to him. And his operator name is Pocket. Pocket's real name is Pierre Hutchinson, and he's from New Orleans, Louisiana, and he's a defender who's a 3-speed 1-armor. Now, Pocket's ability is the Mimicrophone, and he's written out a pretty decent description to describe how it works, which I'll read now. Basically, Pocket can throw a device that can make the sounds of his weapon firing from afar, rolling on the ground like Sin's or Ying's gadget. And it can also be deployed on walls and await proximity before firing off, sort of like a proximity alarm. So basically what this would do is it would basically be like a Ying Candela, except it plays gunshot noises from a distance. I feel like this could be useful for scaring the attackers away or to trick them into thinking that you've rotated somewhere else. Like, for example, if they've droned you out and then you throw your gadget down the hallway somewhere else, they'll think that you're shooting at someone else, and then they'll run into the map expecting you to have rotated away, and then you can get the surprise on them and potentially get a free kill. So I definitely think that this could be useful in the right circumstances. However, that isn't all that Pocket has. He also has a passive ability. His passive ability is when an opponent is downed, Pocket can perform a pickpocket, similar to Caveira's interrogations. However, instead of being 3 seconds long and revealing enemy locations for 7 seconds, one of two things will happen over the 2-second animation. If not used, Pocket will take all of an attacker's secondary gadgets, however many they may have. If the attacker has used said secondary gadgets, Pocket will then steal their secondary gadget instead. If neither are available, Pocket will have his own secondary gadget fully replenished. This is an absolutely insane passive ability. Being able to steal secondary gadgets from the enemy team, potentially gadgets from the enemy team, or refilling your own secondary gadgets is incredibly strong. But to be honest, this passive ability all by itself could probably be its own operator just because of how strong it is, and it would probably still be overpowered. So because of that, I do think that this operator concept is extremely unique. However, I don't think it would work in the actual game from a balancing perspective. So for the fun rating, I gave this an 8 because the passive seems fun to play, but the primary gadget doesn't seem super engaging at all. So that's why I docked it a few points. However, on balancing, I gave it a 3 because I think an operator that has their own gadgets and secondary gadgets that can then steal attacker gadgets is just way too strong. If they were going to implement this in Siege, Ubisoft would have to make the stealing ability it's just that on its own, because then it would force the defender to get a down, which would already make the gadget kind of niche, and it would also force them to down an attacker with utility left over. And sometimes if you down an attacker, the gadget wouldn't even be that useful for you on defense. So I think that would help balance it. But if Pocket was to stay the way they currently are and with an ability and a passive ability, I think it'd be too strong. And then for uniqueness, I gave it an 8 because I do think this is a very unique idea. However, I only gave it an 8 and not a 10 because it does suck that it lacks any sort of description of what secondary gadgets they would have or what weapons they had. So overall, I gave this operator concept a 19 out of 30. Definitely not a bad score, but I definitely think that it could be reworked a lot more to be more balanced and to also be more descriptive. Now, following up Pocket, we have the second operator, Firefly, who is submitted by TJ-C7C. The real name of Firefly is Jackson Crowder, and he's from Charleston, West Virginia. And TJ did describe what primary weapons, what secondary weapons, and what secondary gadgets this operator would have. For a primary weapon, he would have an SNS buckshot shotgun, which is a new weapon, and he'd have the M4. And then on top of that, for secondary weapons, he'd have the 1911 or the M9. Then for secondary gadgets, he'd have breaching charges or flashbangs. Honestly, his kit seems pretty fun to use. I'm not a big fan of having a new shotgun on an attacker because a lot of times they won't end up getting used, but obviously that's just getting into semantics. And I do think that the loadout would be fun to use because it's an M4 with a 1911. It's basically Maverick's loadout. Now, Firefly's ability is the EMP charge, and TJ's description for it is: imagine a normal breaching charge on how you place it down, but when you activate it, lights out. All the lights in the room are disabled for a certain period of time. It'll make defending a hell of a lot harder since you'll have to rely on map knowledge and your own hearing. Anything in its radius could also be disabled for a short amount of time as well. Defenders will also have new flashlights turned on automatically soon after this, but attackers can equip flashlights as well if they choose. Now, for me, I think this ability is a very interesting idea. I do like the idea of being able to turn off the lights in the map and make it extremely dark to the point where you literally can't see without a flashlight. However, I do think that having the flashlight be an attachment is going to be pretty annoying because that means the only way to counter this operator is to bring an attachment in your matches, which means you won't be able to bring laser sight if this operator's picked pretty often. So to me, I think flashlights would have to be something just added to all weapons without it having to waste an attachment slot for this to work properly, especially since it seems attackers are also affected by the darkness as well, obviously. So they would have to equip flashlights on their weapons in placements of, I'm assuming, laser sights. For a fun rating, I gave it an 8 because it seems like a really fun gadget to use. However, I docked at some points because I do think it would be annoying to go against, because imagine you're playing in the bomb site and then all the lights go off and you can't see anything. That would get pretty annoying. However, from a balancing perspective, I gave it a 5, which was higher than the previous. The reason why I gave it a 5 is because it seems like the operator could be really weak since the defenders get flashlights, and also requiring a special attachment to use it seems quite questionable, which is why I docked at some points here. However, since it is a breaching charge that acts like a Thatcher EMP, but that also turns off the lights in the area, it could still be quite useful. I'd have to get hands-on to actually be able to tell whether this would be strong or not. And it would also depend on how far of a radius the lights are disabled. And then from a uniqueness perspective, I gave the operator a 7 because it's basically a Thatcher EMP in a breaching charge form. So it's not super unique. However, the aspect of the map lights going off is super unique. And so that's why I gave it a 7. Now, the next operator concept, Hazard, was sent in by Minotaur_2004. So shout out to him. And this operator is an attacker. For his loadout, he comes equipped with a Galil as a primary weapon and the Camraz as his other primary weapon. And for secondary weapons, he has a Gon 6, the Reaper Mark II, or the C75 Auto. And then for secondary gadgets, he has smoke grenades and claymores. Overall, I think his loadout seems pretty fun, especially since you're going to get to have access to the Galil, which is one of my favorite weapons in COD. Now, for his ability, he has the acid canister, and its description is as follows. An acidic canister that reacts differently depending on the surface it touches. When thrown on a hard wall that isn't electrified, the acid will slowly decompose the wall, creating a medium-sized hole that attackers can crouch through and that breaks hatches. This effect will persist if the wall becomes electrified or frozen during the process. When thrown on a soft wall, the acid will quickly decompose the surface, doubling in size, creating a large walkway entrance or vertical holes. When thrown on the ground, the canister will create a pool of acid that lasts a long duration, causing defenders to cough while dealing 10 damage per second. Basically, this seems like a very strong hard breacher that can counter bandit tricking, because if a canister is thrown onto a wall and then it's electrified or frozen, the acid will not be affected and it will continue to seep through. I think this is an interesting concept because it would basically mean that players couldn't bandit trick against a hazard. If they wanted to counter hazard, they would have to make for sure the wall stayed electrified permanently and they didn't take batteries off and then place them back down, because if the acid canisters were thrown onto the wall and then a bandit battery was put on, the acid would be unaffected. However, if the wall stays electrified the whole time, then the acid charge will be affected. So I think there's definitely some cool mechanics there that can make it pretty interesting. And I also like the fact that it can act as sort of an area denial gadget on top of that by dealing damage to defenders that get in its radius. So you could use him similar to like an Ace, but you could also use him like Capitao to like clear out catwalk and stuff on Clubhouse. So for funness, I definitely think he's a 10. Having a mix between a hard breacher and area denial operator seems extremely fun. And also the Galil is a gun that I've always wanted in Siege. From a balancing perspective, I gave it an 8 because I think it could be overpowered depending on how it's balanced. However, I don't think it's egregious enough to penalize it too heavily. And then for uniqueness, I gave it a 10 because I've literally never seen anything like this before. So I got a total of 28 out of 30 for me. Now, following up Hazard, the next operator concept is Viper. And this operator concept was sent in by Carlakai. And the real name for Viper is Jack Morin. He's from Montreal, Canada. He's an attacker, 2 speed, 2 armor. And then for primary weapons, he has the MPX SMG and the C8 SFW. And then for secondary weapons, he has the MK1 9mm. And then for secondary gadgets, he has claymores, smokes, and stuns. Now for the gadget, Viper has acidic melt. And the description reads as follows. Viper shoots a special gun that deploys a long panel with an incredibly acidic liquid that seeps from it, able to melt holes on even reinforced walls. Acid panels can also be placed on doors and windows where the acid will drip, dealing damage to anyone, attacker or defender, and instantly destroying any extra armor one may have. So basically this seems like a mix between an Aruni and some sort of hard breacher, because you can deploy these panels on reinforcements to melt them away, but you can also deploy them on doorways to deal damage to anyone who walks through them. It's definitely a very interesting concept. I don't know how it would work balancing wise. It would kind of depend on how many panels they got. However, what's interesting about this concept and what I liked about Carlakai's submission is that it also has lore. The lore reads, Jack Morin grew up in a quiet town. He was always a quiet kid who didn't speak much except around his childhood friend, Sebastian, whom he began to call Buck. After the two helped to save a dying buck the pair found in the forest. At the age of 15, Jack was believed to be one of the victims in a hostage incident. However, his body was never found and he was presumed dead 2 months later. Sebastian was left distraught at this loss and vowed to live every day to the fullest, the incident being his motivation to join the military as soon as he could. Jack was not dead, but found in the forest by a man named Gerald Morris, aka Deimos, who had freshly left Rainbow and was seeking revenge. Gerald trained Jack to become a fantastic soldier, telling him that their work was helping people, and eventually Jack was promoted to second in command, right under Gerald. Blaring alarms were heard in the middle of the night at Rainbow HQ, a text-to-speech voice calling out a security breach near where Deimos was being held, awaiting his trial for the murder of Harry. The first 3 agents on the scene and ready were Buck, Ash, and Sophia, arriving in time only to see Deimos flying on a helicopter with a masked man standing tall next to him. He began to remove the hockey mask depicting Lucifer rising from the ash. Buck's grip on his gun began to loosen when he saw the indisputable face of Jack staring at him, whisking away the man who killed his boss. I think this lore is extremely sick because he's basically riding this Jack Morin character, or Viper, as a childhood friend of Buck's that is now on the opposing side in this conflict between Deimos and Team Rainbow. So I definitely think that this is a really cool idea, and I think Ubisoft could write some characters lore similar to this and it would work really well. So I'm a big fan of the writing of the lore here. It's probably the strongest part of this entire concept in my opinion, even stronger than the gadget, which I think is already pretty unique and cool as well. So I gave this operator concept a 10 on the fun rating because I think a mix of a Rooney on attack and a hard breacher seems interesting and fun. I gave it an 8 on balancing because I think an MPX on attack seems weak and the gadget itself seems quite strong, maybe even overpowered. So I give it an 8 to kind of try to balance out the fact that I think the MPX would be a little weak. And then on uniqueness, I gave it a 10 because while it is similar to the previous idea, I think compared to concepts I've seen online, it's still quite unique. And now our next operator concept is named Null, and this was sent in by Bacchus_93. This operator is an attacker and they are a 3-speed 1 health. Their primary weapons are the SE3000 and the M590 shotgun, and then their secondary weapons are the PMM and the Gon 6. And then for secondary gadgets, they come equipped with frag grenades and breaching charges. Overall, a pretty solid loadout, and considering they have the SE3000, I would be a big fan because I love that weapon. However, for their gadget, it's called the Void, aka the TDD-4, and it's considered to be a throwable decoy device. Null gets access to 2 of these discs that last 8 seconds, and they activate manually with the click of a button. And how it works is it's a small black disc-like device that can be thrown and remotely triggered. When activated, Void generates a dark zone radius somewhere between 6 to 8 meters, and only one can be active at a time, and if the other one gets activated, the first one gets deactivated. When defenders walk into this zone's radius, footsteps and gunfire go completely silent or echo unnaturally. Phantom footsteps appear to circle them but aren't real. Pings disappear. A heartbeat audio intensifies as if someone is right behind them. The HUD fuzzes slightly, similar to proximity interference. Real gadget sounds are masked. Slight input delay is induced, and fake sounds, for example, gunfire or breaching sounds, can be heard. And they're countered by mute signal disruptors, Jaeger ADSs, Wamai magnets, Aruni's gates, Solace because she can detect them through walls, and cameras because they can see inside of the radius of the black zone if they are outside of the range of the gadget. This seems like an incredibly cool idea and a really fun concept because it's basically a gadget that's meant to deprive defenders of as much intel as possible. They didn't specify here, but especially if it's bulletproof, I also think that it could be quite strong and actually quite balanced, especially since he only has 2 of them. So if it's a bulletproof disc that can be thrown and then it summons this massive void, that's a really cool idea. I think it would be annoying to go against, especially since it induces slight input delay. I think that might be an accessibility problem, and Ubisoft might would have to remove that aspect of it, but I think everything else here would be a super cool idea. Imagine you throw a couple of these down into the bomb site and the defenders can barely see anything. They can't really tell what's going on because they can't hear nothing, and also they're hearing fake noises, so they don't even know whether you're planting or not. And for that reason, this could be quite strong. However, I think it's balanced because, like I said, there's only 2 discs. It's countered by a decent amount of operators, and only one of them can be active at a time. And so you can't have both of them active at the same time, and the duration is only 8 seconds. So I definitely think that this is a totally balanced concept, especially if they remove the input delay problem that I discussed. So for fun rating, I gave it a 9 because it seems like it could be a lot of fun to use the discs, and I also like the gun. The only reason why I docked it a point is because I think it would be a boring gadget to be on the opposing side of. However, as long as they remove the input delay part, I don't think it would be that bad. And then from a balancing perspective, I gave it a 10 because it has a lot of counters. It seems like the radius and the cooldown has been thought out enough to where I don't think it would be completely busted. And since you can only have 1 active at a time, I don't think it would be that big of a deal. And then for uniqueness, I gave it an 8 because it's a super unique concept. However, they didn't add any new weapons or come up with any unique loadout. So that's why I didn't give it a full 10. So overall, this concept got a 27. Next up, we have the 6th concept sent in by a YouTube user by the name of Me, Myself, and K. And this operator's name is Fantasm. This is a defender who's a 2-speed, 2 armor, and he has access to the Colt M635 primary SMG and the Spaz 15 shotgun. And then for secondary weapons, he has the 5.7 USG and the SMG 12. And then finally, for secondary gadgets, he has proximity alarms, a deployable shield, and barbed wire. Overall, his loadout seems really fun. Now, what is the gadget? Well, this gadget is named Veil Fall, and the description is as follows. Fantasm starts with 6 Veil Fall barricades. Veil Fall is a thick, heavy glass pane that can be put in doorways in place of barricades. The Veil Fall barricade is invisible due to being extremely clean. Inside of the Veil Fall barricade, there is a gas that is not yet activated and is invisible due to not being activated. This behaves as an obstruction to defenders. If an attacking operator touches this barricade, the glass shatters, immediately releasing the gas inside to the air right where the operator broke it. This immediately concusses the operator and causes them to laugh loudly and uncontrollably while in a dazed state, revealing their position and destroying the Veil Fall barricade. Additionally, they will take 10 damage per second and remain permanently concussed while within the Veil Fall smoke. After a period of 5 seconds, the smoke dissipates and any operator can enter the area safely. Attackers can remove the barricade by shooting it, which will cause the effect to go off, acting as a notification for nearby defenders. Now, I think this gadget is a decent idea. However, I think it would need a lot of tuning to get added to Siege. The reason why I say that is because I think that the Veil Fall barricade being completely invisible would be an extremely bad idea, because in Siege, you always want to be able to counter whatever you're going against. If the barricade's completely invisible, there's no way that you're going to be able to tell whether it's on a doorway or not, which means that there's no way you're going to be able to shoot the barricade knowingly. The only time you'd be countering these barricades is if you're pre-firing an opponent or you're in a gunfight, which means that when you're playing Fantasm, it would feel pretty bad to lose some of your gadgets to people just randomly pre-firing through a doorway. I think the only way to balance this operator properly would be to make these barricades visible when someone's droning, because then it would punish attackers when they're not droning through doorways properly, and you'd be able to catch a few of them off guard and potentially get some free kills from it, but it would still be counterable and not impossible to see, which is why I think this operator concept is a little bit flawed. There really isn't any gadget in Siege that's completely invisible other than old goo mines, and even they were visible enough to where you could see them on drones. However, the operator concept as a whole, I do still think would be fun because I do like their loadout. So I gave them a 6 because I think the gadget could be boring to play with the way it currently is, since attackers would just randomly pre-fire and potentially destroy some of your barricades. And also, since they are completely invisible to the naked eye, I think it would be annoying to go against. However, I think their weapons are really cool, and I think that with some rebalancing to the gadget, it could be fun to use. So I gave it a 6. Then for balance, I gave it a 3 for the same reasons I just discussed. I think it would need some major tweaks to be able to be added to the game in its current state. And then for uniqueness, I gave it a 10 because I've literally never seen any other operator concept like this. So I still gave it a 10 despite some of its flaws, leaving Fantasm with an overall score of 19 out of 30. Now, following up Fantasm, we have another ghost related character, and that is Phantom, sent in by Forrest on YouTube. Phantom is a defender and he's a 2-speed 2 armor. He comes equipped with a K68 and the 417 DMR on defense, and his secondary weapons are a new machine pistol, which he didn't name. He literally just said new machine pistol, and some form of secondary shotgun. And then for secondary gadgets, he gets impacts or a nitro cell. So far, I like the loadout. I think that the 417 could be a problem on defense, but we'd have to wait and see. And then I do like the fact that he has a secondary SMG or a secondary shotgun, so you have a lot of versatility there in the kit. As for his gadget, he gets 2 flying drones that look similar to Deimos Deathmark trackers that he can then stick to any surface and make it act as a camera, or he can fly around and get more intel for the team. This seems like probably the most fun gadget in this entire video so far. I've always wanted a drone in Siege that you could fly, and I think on defense it would work even better than on attack, which is why I think that his choice to make it a defender is so strong here, because you could use these drones to fly around the map to drone out for your teammates who are roaming. You could use them to deny a plant late round, and you can also just set them up in good spots like Valkyrie cameras to allow your team to get additional information as well. I think this would be a really good operator, and that's even excluding the rest of their kit. So I think that this is a really good concept. It's simple, but I think it gets the job done. So overall, I gave it a fun rating of 10 out of 10 because I think it would be fun for the reasons I discussed already. I gave it a 9 out of 10 for balance because I think everything around the operator is balanced except for the 417 on defense. I think that you would have to consider removing that from the operator before releasing it, because I think 417 on defense would be too strong. And then for uniqueness wise, I gave it a 7 because I do think it's unique. However, I don't like the fact that they didn't name any sort of secondary weapons at all, so I dropped some uniqueness points off for that. Overall though, still a very strong operator concept, giving it a total score of 26. And I really hope that Ubisoft adds an operator similar to this in the future, especially if they're a defender and not an attacker. Now next up, we have our 8th operator concept in the form of Sonar. That's just the name I gave them because the person who submitted the operator didn't give them a name, and the person who sent this operator concept is Spitfire 30. At least I think that's how I say your username. Shout out to you for sending this idea. And this operator, I'm assuming, is an attacker, and they're 2-speed 2 armor. However, once again, the person who submitted this concept did not specify what side of the game they were on or even what speed they were. So I just filled this in because I felt it would be the most likely scenario for this gadget. And then for primary weapons, they specified the operator would have the SR25 and the C8 SFW. And then for secondary gadgets, they specified that they would have smokes and stuns. So overall, solid loadout. Now for the gadget, they said it would work like a mix of IQ and Solace. Basically, the gadget could be activated to run infinitely with a pistol out. And when active, audio could be seen through walls. So Sonar could then hold the ability button on this different audio they see through walls to lock onto the sound exactly and hear it. And this would basically be used to allow them to hear sound from across the map. Now, I think this is a really neat gadget, and I think it could be really useful. The reason why I say that is because imagine you're trying to counter a roamer, and they're constantly running around the map. You could see the audio of them running in different places and follow those audio notifications to them. But you could also use this gadget to hear things like defenders throwing down new gadgets, like you could hear them throwing down a goo mine from across the map, or you could hear them hop on cameras and stuff like that. So I definitely think that this would be a unique gadget, and it would allow you to get a lot more information than you would be able to otherwise. And that's assuming you're in a 5-stack. If you're not in a 5-stack, this would be incredibly useful in solo queue because it allows you to get information that your teammates are not calling out to you. So overall, I gave this operator an 8 on fun rating because I think it would be just as fun as old Solace. However, I think it could get pretty annoying to go against, especially if attackers started using it to kill people through the floor. On a balancing perspective, I gave it a 10 because I think it could be balanced as long as Sonar doesn't immediately get notified of a new sound being played. For example, if Ubisoft added this operator into the game, they can make it to where Sonar can only see sounds that are 10 seconds old or older. So that way he can't immediately react to new sound and like shoot someone through the floor when they hop on cams. And also, if the type of sound isn't revealed until you actually scan it, like if it has an overclock mechanic built in, I think that would allow it to be balanced as well. However, since they didn't specify any of that, I just gave it a 10 because I think with some proper balancing decisions before release, it could be all right. And then for uniqueness, I gave it a 7 because I think it's pretty unique. However, the person who made this concept didn't specify what side they were on, what even their name was, or what armor rating they were. So I just gave it a 7 because it seems like this concept is in pretty early stages. And then for the 9th and final operator, we have my operator concept I made 4 years ago. This operator's name is Brace, and their real name is Gerald Jackson, and they're from Atlanta, Georgia. There's 2-speed 2 armor on defense, and their primary weapons are the ACR or the KCS G12 shotgun, and then their secondary is the Glock 18, which is basically the automatic law enforcement form of the Glock. So basically this would be a new machine pistol added to the game. And then for secondary gadgets, they would have a bulletproof camera or observation blockers. Now their ability is the Fortis Shard. This can be thrown onto a drone hole to immediately fill it with bulletproof metal. It can also be thrown onto the ceiling to fill in a small section of vertical holes or onto an Ace/Habana hole in a reinforcement. I always imagine it as about the same size of a Kiba, but a rectangle. And it can be countered by explosives, Ram's buggy drone, Maverick, any hard breach utility at all, and Fuse since he can put his charges through them. And Brace gets 4 of these shards. I think this gadget concept is extremely unique, especially considering that I made this concept before Azami. My idea was always to have an operator get added to the game that could block drone holes. I always wanted that. And so I came up with this a few years ago. And I think that this is a really cool idea because unlike Azami's Kibas, these would have to be used more reactionarily. Because yes, you could throw a few of them on drone holes in the bomb site and call it a day. However, that wouldn't be the strongest way to use them. The strongest way to use them would be to throw them on reinforcements that the enemy team is trying to make actively, or to throw them on the ceiling to fill in small sections of vertical holes as well. This would not only force the attackers to have to waste hard breach utility to get rid of it, but it would also allow you to hold on to certain extremely strong power positions for a lot longer. So because of that, I'm giving this operator concept a 10 on the fun rating because obviously since it was made by me 4 years ago, I'm going to like this concept a lot and think it's fun to play. And then for a balancing perspective, I gave it a 10 win because it's countered by a whole lot of stuff. It's countered by hard breaches, it's countered by explosives, and since you only get 4 of them, it would be very easy for the attackers to burn through all of that, especially since it doesn't cover a very big range. And then for uniqueness, I gave it a 4 because I think there have been a lot of other operator concepts when it comes to blocking drone holes. This is not something that I came up with by any means, and it's been around for a very long time. However, I did give it a 4 because I think that the weapons I chose are super unique, and so I gave my own concept a 24 in total. I think nowadays this operator isn't nearly as necessary because of the fact that Azami exists. It would kind of make them feel very similar to each other, and so that's why I don't think this operator concept is nearly as strong as it once was when I made it back 4 years ago. And anyways, that wraps up today's video. Let me know your thoughts on these concepts in the comments down below. Also, if you have any concepts of your own that you'd like to submit for the next video, go ahead and leave them in the comments because I'm sure I'll do more of these videos in the future. And if you leave your concepts in the comments, I'll make for sure to get to them at some point. Now, if you did enjoy today's video, I make these content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.